Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's John T, and Lolo's not here, and Melky's not here, because they're quite busy, and I wanted to put this one out while it was still kind of relevant, because there's a thing happening. It's not like a huge thing, but it's a small thing, and I figured that it was actually worth talking about, relating to churches and COVID, and are we being persecuted by being prevented from meeting together? So I wanted to talk with an actual pastor, the pod pastor, as she calls herself, Amie Aitken, who we spoke to sometime last year, pastor in Scotland, and get her perspective on including people in church during a pandemic, as well as whether we are in fact being oppressed. So I hope you enjoy it. Don't worry, Laura and Melky are actually on the podcast. They sent me some voice notes with their thoughts on the whole COVID thing, as well as, and I think we're going to start with, something to do with what's been happening in the United States. If you like this episode, do check out the rest of them at beerchristianity.libsyn.com. Find our newsletter on Substack, Beer Christianity, the newsletter. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Beer Exianity. That's probably all the info you need. Here is a question that I recorded for Melky and Laura in a very special place. Hey guys, I know we're only meant to be recording a little bit later, like next week at some point, and I know that our next episode was supposed to be about Israel-Palestine, and I've done the interview with Ilan Pape, but stuff that's happening in the US, and actually some stuff that's happening in the UK, requires something to be said. So this is me calling you from the bath, by the way, just in keeping with that deeply appropriate Beer Christianity ethos. But I wanted to say, or wanted to ask you guys what you thought about what was happening in the US with those protesters breaking into the Capitol building. I'm talking to you the day after that happened. What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm seeing a lot of stuff that's like all about the outrage about this is the darkest day in America's history, which suggests that person has never read any of America's history, or that this is somehow a coup. I mean, it doesn't. If it's a coup like a pigeon makes. It's like the worst attempted coup in the world, and you'd think Americans would be better at it, having done it so much in other countries. Do you think it's a coup? Is it an act of terror? Because it looks to me like a protest that got ugly. And I worry about the narrative that I'm seeing, particularly in kind of Christian liberal circles, which is like, this is unacceptable behavior, because that's not the unacceptable part of it. It's what they wanted to achieve. For me, if it was a Black Lives Matter protest, that would be perfectly reasonable things to have done at any point in 2020. If an election had actually been stolen and there was any evidence whatsoever for that, not any evidence, but if there was significant evidence, then again, I don't think breaking some windows and occupying a place is in itself the problem. The problem is that these people are fascists. The problem is that their entire worldview and motivation is white nationalist nonsense that seeks to completely subjugate, anyone who is not like them. It is a fascist ideology, and that's the thing that we should be appalled by, not the fact that they misbehaved. I have to say, though, for me, the main issue is how little resistance they faced compared to the BLM protests, where so many people were arrested, like 14,000 in the initial George Floyd protests. At this one, where they actually broke into the seat of government, there were 15 people arrested, I want to say. I just find that ridiculous. I find it ridiculous when you compare the photos of the kind of military resistance BLM faced. And if you can imagine a group of Muslims storming the Capitol, but because these people were carrying Jesus Saves banners, I think they were cut a lot of slack. I think the problem is a lot of the military and the police feel exactly the same way as them. There is a lot of support for Trump in that, and I'm surprised they resisted at all to an extent. I'm surprised that white nationalists who have been defending the way that the police brutalize protesters, which is never okay, are now suddenly upset that it's being turned on them. And I just think
I think the whole thing is deeply sad, and it's definitely been incited by Trump. But for me, it's not a coup. And while they would have called it a terrorist attack, based if it had been Muslims, and they definitely would have shot so many more people had it been a Black Lives Matter protest. I'm not sure it is that thing, and I worry that in our haste to condemn it, we end up backing ourselves into a corner when the good guys actually need to protest and take things a little bit more directly. So anyway, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on that? Once you've given me your thoughts, I will then ask you the other question.
In also continuing with the general appropriateness of Be a Christianity podcast, you started sending that voice note, and my immediate thought was, is he sending this voice note from in the past? So there's that. But yeah, this is pretty fucked, isn't it? Yeah, I'm gonna try and remember the things that you have said, but probably won't remember them all. But hey ho. I think so. Starting with the coup thing, I don't think it's a coup. I think it. I mean, it's a very badly done coup. I think the reason people are saying it's a coup and thinking it's a coup is that I think it's a way that it was incited and the way that it was planned. Like Donald Trump told people to go there on the 6th of January. I nearly said July. It's not July, it's January. And there were people with Civil War like jumpers and things like that. And I think I saw something on Twitter about like how the reason that they were protesting was to try and get Pence to stop saying that Biden was going to be president. And in that regard, I think that's why people are going to saying it's a coup, because then obviously he did, and they broke into the Capitol. So like that's why I don't think that they would have. I doubt they would have stopped it, but hey ho. It's just I think the thing that terrifies me the most is if nothing happens. And I know that there are people trying to impeach Donald Trump now because he did nothing, and I agree it's not safe for Donald Trump to stay in office. And it just terrifies me. This is going to be just added to another one of the list of all of the things that have happened that nothing has been done to challenge it. And I think that is what scares me the most, because where can you where do you draw the line if you're not going to police this? You're just telling people that this is okay, that they can do this, which is it's terrifying. Like and you know what you're saying. Like I agree. Like what you're saying. Like you know the acts themselves, we should be able to protest. That's fine. But they're saying that that just blindly believing that anything that Donald Trump has done is fine and okay, and just blindly assuming that this is it's just terrifying. And the thing that probably fucked me over the most was Donald Trump, which in a video that has now been deleted from by Twitter, basically saying, well, no, not basically physically saying, you need to go home in peace. We love you. I think you're so special, but you need to go home. We love you, he says, and just continues to say that this is fine. And it just terrifies. It's terrifying because he has lost control of his mob, and people are already dying. I'm terrified about what happens next, to be honest. So this is nice and cheery, isn't it? But yeah.
It's funny you should say that you're recording from your bath, Jonty, because as you will realise by now, I am also sending this message from Jonty's bath. The thing that struck me, one of the many things that struck me, was my initial kind of impulse to play sides and have my, biases confirmed. I think that's a temptation of mine. Whatever unfolding news event is deep and profound evidence of whatever I already believe. And straight away I was making comparisons with the Black Lives Matter protesters, but in this instance found myself siding with the cops. Get them, you tell them, law and order. And we need to check the old speck in our own eye. And it's interesting you draw, those equivalencies. And I think, John T is the first person I've heard saying this should be allowed. I was trying to think of a UK equivalent, and actually, to get into Parliament and stage a sit-in or whatever, we should be allowed to do that without being shot to death. And there has been deaths and a lot of injuries as well, and it's just tragic. And the police brutality problem is a massive problem. And as I say, I need to check my own biases, but it seems like the same people that were apologists for police brutality against Black Lives Matter protesters are now surprised when they open fire when they try and storm a government building. There should be much better police tactics to be able to deal, non-lethal force and all that. And also allow demonstrators to demonstrate, let's not be mortified by people breaking windows. Yes, because I did see some of Biden's comments, and I think in some places he went over the top. Let's not, whatever you do, don't call these people protesters. They're violent terrorists. Which again, I think, just to say there was explosives found in a couple of places. But I think for the most part, we don't want to play the same game about demonising and dehumanising our opponents. Again, if folks tarred all the Black Lives Matter protesters as violent, mindless thugs, the vast majority of these folks, these Trump demonstrators, are putting themselves at risk because they care about an issue they believe that's bigger than themselves. Now, the reason they believe that is messed up, and I think it's sad. Inevitably going to sound patronising, but it's sad that they've been led that way, and it's sad that these fringe radicals have been legitimised by the highest office in the land, in the States, which is mental. And Trump needs to be held responsible, and his enablers need to be held responsible, and those other elected officials that have kind of stood by and sort of, the Republican ones mainly, I'm thinking, that have kind of gone along with Trump and not opposed him, out of, as some commentator said, from cowardice and opportunism, which I thought was very apt, just to allow this kind of rhetoric to keep going. There are consequences, and people feel emboldened, and people without a shred of evidence think that this election's been stolen, and are actively encouraged to go to extreme lengths by the president.
Okay, so my other question is, what do you think about the fact that there is a group going around asking Christian pastors, I got this from a pastor friend in Scotland, to put their names to a legal challenge or some kind of public challenge to the government there, shutting down churches for the sake of people's safety in COVID. to me, and that's what we're going to be talking a little bit to our guest, our pod pastor, Pastor Amie Aitken, who is a pastor in Scotland, and she told me all about this, and so I wanted to talk to her. So we're going to have her on the show in just a bit. But I first wanted to ask you guys what you thought of that stuff, since we don't have a chance to record yet. But yeah, do you think that's a reasonable thing? Do you think that we're being persecuted, that our human rights are being, subjugated as Christians because we're not allowed to meet in church and, lay hands and all that kind of stuff? I'm not saying it's great for everybody, and I'm not saying that I'm loving it more than going to church, but this isn't just a Scotland thing. This is a UK and a worldwide thing. Like, there are Christians all over the world currently crying persecution because they can't go to church because they're trying to save people's lives from a pandemic. To me, that seems damaging to our witness and lacking in any kind of, like, if Protestants are doing this, I really don't get it, because you need the priest to be there for transubstantiation in the host. I don't know. It just seems ridiculous and bad. But I'm going to talk to Amie a little bit about that. But I wanted to know what you thought about it first.
First of all, Scotland is a big place. There's loads of us, like, hundreds of people and places. So I'm just taking a moment to acknowledge the everyday xenophobia. This pastor from Scotland, where is she from? And there's also something fishy that me and her have, me and Amie have never met or spoken. And this time she's on the podcast, I'm pre-recording. So, that's suspicious. Maybe we're the same person. Have you ever thought of that? But as to that question you asked, no, Christians aren't being persecuted, and I think it's silly and a bit frustrating that Christians would behave that way. I would like to see us Christians defending people who are not ourselves. That feels more Jesus-y, to be standing up for those for whom we do not gain any benefit, if they're helped. Not defending our own interests and our own gang, our own group. I think, and yeah, as has been said, to actually claim any kind of persecution, we'd need to be singled out. And if anything, Christians seem still to be very much favoured. And sometimes it can feel like attack or persecution when we have been in a place of privilege and start to lose some of those privileges. I think there is an interesting wider point, not specifically about places of worship, on the government's role and potential loss of civil liberties. I think first lockdown I was all for it, and yes, wow, pandemic, yes, let's do all these measures and all that. But increasingly I'm just getting to the point now where, okay, how long will this last? And just that precedence of, are the government allowed to legally fine us for being outdoors or breaking particular rules of gathering in certain numbers, And that's in no way anti-lockdown. I think it makes sense. I think the pandemic is real and we all need to stay safe and isolate and all that. But it's just that legal framework, I think that there may be some people who are better informed than myself who may have interesting views on whether that's kind of crossing lines or setting precedents, potentially.
Yeah, I was actually, I don't know, I was really surprised that this was actually a thing that when you said this, that to me seems quite irresponsible. I mean, if you're asking the question, are you being persecuted? Let's remember that the government told people that they could not gather for Eid the night before Eid in 2020 last year, and we were allowed to. I mean, albeit the things changed, but we were originally going to be allowed to have 5 days for Christmas, where COVID didn't exist anymore. So I don't think Christians are being persecuted. I think if Christians were being persecuted in the regard of opening churches, they surely, I don't know, but this is going to be a terrible voice note to have to put on a podcast. I'm so sorry. My thoughts are all over the place. But if they had opened mosques and synagogues and temples and not let churches reopen, that would have been, I feel like that's a pretty good stand for persecution. But less so. I have made the decision at the moment to my church. Obviously, we're in the UK, in England, so our churches can open. I have made the decision not to go back to church for a little while. I personally don't think it's safe. I think let's just kind of, as much as I would like to see people, let's minimize the risk in any way possible. And interestingly, my church, the minister of my church put out an email today saying we're still opening, but I do have to ask you to very much go home immediately after church, because I don't want people to get a bad impression of us if people on the street that our church is on are seen to be congregating outside of church. I don't think, with schools closing, I don't want people to see that and think that we're taking advantage of the rules. So which I thought was quite good. But I'm leaning towards churches shouldn't be open, but also the measures I've seen in churches tend to be easier to police than in schools and things anyway. I do think the situation is different, but I think at this point in time, it is more important to reduce the risk whatever way we can. And I totally get that everyone else's situations are different, and that people have been struggling with this mentally and really benefit from that physical kind of contact with people. So totally get that. Not negating that experience at all. But in my experience, in my opinion, I've made that decision not to do it. I think maybe it may be better to do what the UK government. I need to stop saying UK government. English government has said, and let churches open, and then maybe let churches open, but make the decision. Say the churches can be open, but let the church make the decision themselves whether to open or not. Maybe a better course of action. But I don't think Christians are being persecuted, and I think we should all be safe. In conclusion,
the eminently sensible Laura Durrant telling us how it is. You can follow Laura on Twitter at Laura Durrant, Durrant 27. And before that, you heard Malky Curry. That's at Malky, Malky, Curry, Currie. And also moi at John T. Langley, Jonty Langley, Langley. Just thought I'd give us a bit of a Twitter plug, really. If you want to follow Beer Christianity on Twitter, we post stuff, about the things that we think. That's good. That's good talkings on a podcast. Good. This is why I need the other guys, basically, is because I suck at talking to myself. Anyway, we post a whole bunch of stuff, not just the podcasts, though it does help you to not miss the podcast if we post it there. And also, it means that you can promote us and share our stuff and all that kind of thing. If you do want to promote us, I would love that. Also, if you want to speak to us on SpeakPipe, that'd be really great. Leave us a voice note. Tell us what you think about things. And if you wanted to go to beerchristianity.substack.com, you can also sign up to the newsletter where I write a kind of weekly news column, and where Laura has an idea for sharing something on it fairly soon as well. And we're going to be getting a whole bunch of guest writers, and it's going to be very cool. And if this is your first time listening to Beer Christianity, thanks so much for sticking with us. We're about to hear from Amie Aitken, the podcaster. She's not a podcaster generally. She completely denies that her future is in podcasting, though I disagree. But she's our podcast's pastor, our go-to pastor, I want to say. I don't know. We went to her once. Seems legit. Anyway, here's me and Amie shooting the breeze and talking about, wow, did I just channel my inner Russell Brand? Did a little bit. Sorry about that. Me and Amie coming at you like Cleopatra. Hey, friend.
Hi. Hi.
This is the second
I don't know
time
how
we're
people
recording
do this for a living.
It's nice to talk to you. Welcome to the podcast, Amie Aitken. What did you call yourself earlier? I think it's a great title.
The official podcaster.
Podcaster. The official podcaster of Beer Christianity, Amie Aitken, coming at us straight out of, I always remember I forget the part of Scotland you're in. Fife.
Glenrothes in Fife.
Straight out of Glenrothes, Amie Aitken, the podcaster.
The Reverend Aitken.
Yeah. How's the reverending biz?
Well, it certainly is a thing. It's good. We managed to do Christmas, and prior to Christmas, we were able to have some in-person services. So we got one final kind of Advent, Christmassy Eve type service, which was really nice. And we did Christmas Day online, and then that was kind of it. So it's been quiet, but I am not. Don't tell the rest of Christendom, but I'm not a Christmas person. So
you don't like Christmas?
No.
That's weird because you don't look green at all, and yet
I know I just find the whole thing so unnecessary. So
I hate all joy.
I do, truly. So I was fine to have a quiet Christmas, and for most pastors, it's normally a very stressful time. So it was nice to not be wrapped up in doing so many things. We did do a lot. We did feed the community and all that kind of stuff, the good stuff. We didn't have the unnecessary stuff.
That's awesome. You didn't have the kids coming up and showing their presents at the front.
Just no one enjoys that.
So grinchy.
I'm a Grinch in heart in some ways.
That's nice. Also, it's Beer Christianity. Are you drinking anything?
Oh, I'm not, actually.
You know what? I'm just going to pause the podcast right here while you go and grab something.
Okay,
what is it?
So this one is Stockholm's Brannery dry gin. And it comes in like one of these apothecary bottles of yore. Isn't it? It's so cool.
It looks like something you'd find, in an apothecary or an old pharmacist or something like that. That kind of brown bottle with the lip and the cork
in the top.
Oh, so nice.
So it's an elder, flower, heather, and rosemary. So it's quite floral. So my plan is I have a gin lounge in my house because I'm bougie. And I want to have a shelf with just like 3 or 4 of these, like a little kind of lab.
Nice.
Cute.
So cool. Good aesthetics.
Stockholm's Brannery.
You should tell us. And you're going to be drinking that fine gin with Ribena.
Because I have no tonic.
This is honestly the most Scottish thing I've ever encountered.
We make do. That's all I'm saying.
That's amazing. I am drinking Heineken 0.0 alcohol-free beer. I know you're looking at me with great judgment. I'm sorry.
Like, what even is the point?
Anyway, thanks for joining us again on Beer Christianity. You and I only rarely speak on podcasts. That's right. Yeah,
we do, and we needed a catch-up. So what choice did we have but to make another episode? And of course, I am back by popular demand.
Absolutely.
Love me.
Actually, our audience did love you. If you are a new person to Beer Christianity, you really should go and listen to the one with me and Amy on Beer Christianity. What did we end up talking? What was it even called? I can't remember. I think it was called Amie Aitken.
It was Amie Aitken. There was something about female pastors and doing the work. Doing the work was the whole thing.
I am glad that you were on that podcast or that episode of the podcast, and I am glad that you're on this one. So welcome back. And this is our third podcast conversation. No, fourth, because I was on yours.
You were on mine. I was on yours, and then we did Schitt's Creek, and then you were on mine. And now we have this. I feel like we've done something else together too.
I feel so as well. Do you want to tell people about your own one and people so that they can go and listen to that where they can find it?
No.
You said this on the music one as well. I love it. You're like the least self-promoting person I've ever met.
If you would like to listen to my previous conversation with John Day, which is mostly about Jim Purvis and my dog, it's called The Conversation Series under the Leslie Baptist Church podcast. And it was my small venture into being a podcast host, which I've officially retired.
Don't be ridiculous.
I've had my run.
You're such a great podcast host. You should definitely carry on.
It's so much work.
Now we get to the serious business of why I wanted to talk to you. It's about 2 things. First of all, the stuff that's happening in the United States. And I believe you're partially to blame. So
Yes.
tell us all about that.
So yesterday I booked flights to America, and approximately 3 hours later there was a complete descent.
Yeah,
So-
you basically started the purge, and I'm not entirely sure why, but somehow,
They heard I was coming.
yeah. What do you think?
Oklahoma were mad about it.
What do you think about all that stuff? Like, a lot of people were calling it like a coup, and yeah, like, what's your view on what was happening there? Particularly the fact that people were carrying like Jesus saves signs alongside their QAnon signs and their,
Listen,
Proud
that's-
Boy stuff.
That is exactly what it means to take the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because I just can't understand this notion that we will just ignore democracy, and because we don't like the results, we're just going to find every excuse we can to override them. In a country which prides itself on people having a voice and democracy serving the will of the people. Now, I understand, obviously, some of that comes from this notion that there is voting fraud and all that kind of stuff. And if you believe the election is rigged, then surely you want to contest that. That's understandable.
Sure. Yeah.
However, I don't understand what they thought they were going to achieve. Truly.
Yeah. So weird.
I was kind of into the Braveheart guy with the big horns and the fur coat. I was like,
You say you were kind of into him. That is not the message you sent me, friend.
I was like, we could hang. He looks like he could have a good time.
The thing is, I thought he was pretty cool looking as well, and I saw a great meme that was like directed by Wes Anderson with him and a whole bunch of people. I just thought it was amazing. And then I found out he's the QAnon shaman, and I was like, ugh.
Listen, everybody has their shadow side, okay?
You're making a lot of excuses for
We're
a
not
man.
all perfect. Yeah, it was
So
just
he's pretty
bizarre.
close in terms of looks.
Yeah. It was just really bizarre. The watching the police, though, the Capitol Police were the thing that baffled me. They kind of just watched them come in and were like, oh, okay, bye.
Because they're white people. I mean, if that had been a BLM protest, people would have been
absolutely.
shot dead in the street. And I know there were some deaths inside the Capitol building, and I think that's really, really sad about
Were they not committed by the agitators, though?
No. Plainclothes cop shot one of them as she
okay.
came into a room where they were obviously protecting somebody or something important, which is not okay, but like, yeah, just so completely avoidable. And I think that's the thing for me is like, the tactics of the police, even though they're now being pointed at fascists, which I'm glad of in a sense, still not okay in a democracy, not okay generally. And if we applaud that sort of stuff and denounce protesters occupying places, I think we open ourselves up to then having the good guys criticized like that in the same way. So it's just and these are not the good guys. These are either deluded and deceived people, or they are actual fascists. And for me, yeah, it can't be tolerated. And
it's all the signs saying like, we won't stand for communism. I was like, I think that's the least of your problems.
Oh, wow.
You're trying to dismantle your own democracy. I don't think communism's your issue.
Yeah. And also like, as a communist, I wish that was a danger in America. You know what I mean? Like,
oh no, we would
give
all
us a
share.
chance.
Ugh.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, oh no, the
Just
vast
pictured
majority
myself
of
as
these
a communist.
Love it. What did you think of? Okay, so there's that. There's the America stuff that's been happening, and what I'm going to do, or what we should already have heard, is Malky and Laura, who couldn't join us on this call.
Oh yeah.
They're avoiding you because they're your alter egos. They've had their comments, which I haven't actually listened to. So this is going to be like a weird, trippy kind of thing where,
like in real time.
Yeah.
Malky sounds like David Tennant. I enjoy it. Have you listened to David Tennant's podcast? I could listen to him all day.
I have not, but I watched that thing that he did with that other guy.
Sam Jones.
No, the thing on iPlayer they did, it was balls. It's just him talking to the guy who was in Good Omens.
Oh, Charlie Sheen, yes.
No, not Charlie Sheen.
Michael Sheen.
Michael Sheen.
Sheen, the good one.
I would listen to Charlie Sheen and David Tennant, though.
Oh, dear.
It'd be amazing. But listen.
I forgot where we're going. Tell me.
So listen, as podcaster, You told me about a thing that you encountered today that made you mad, and I actually had been hearing about this from a friend of mine who was talking to friends, Christian friends in Australia, who are hearing the same thing. And I think there's bits of this coming out everywhere across the UK, but in Scotland, you were contacted by, or in a roundabout way, by some people. Tell us about that and why it made you mad.
Well, someone sent me an email this morning, and I read it before I'd had my first cup of tea, and that's always a bad sign.
Bad move.
And so I went off and went on Twitter about it. But basically, I got an email from, a kind of minister's fellowship saying, here's some information for you to consider joining in with. There's a Christian organization who are going to petition the government to say that it is unlawful for them to have closed the church buildings. And I'm very particular that I say church buildings and not churches, theologically. We're going to petition the government for the unlawful closing of church buildings, and we're going to protest because we have the right to worship and yada, yada. So please, consider signing this petition and raising your voice on behalf of the church, maintaining their religious liberty. And I said, heck no.
Yeah, you did. And you were kind of annoyed by it. Why?
Very annoyed. Listen, if you follow me on Twitter long enough, you'll realize nothing frustrates me more than people having such an unimaginative view of the church and of, what it means to be part of the kingdom of God. And so for me, when I kind of looked at the content of this thing, it was basically, we have the right to worship and you shall not stop us. And I was like, okay, I feel like there's more to the discussion than that. And it was very much about our right to have worship and assembly, our right to gather for communion, our, religious freedom. And I was like, that's all great. We have those things and we need to defend those things. But those things are not in question. I don't think so, certainly. So in Scotland at the moment, we're all in tier 4. Everything's locked down. Pubs are closed. Cafes are closed. The whole thing's shut down. Schools are closed. And so as part of that, church buildings are also closed. And the protest
for our American and listeners in other parts of the world, the tier system is it's TIER. It's not that COVID is so bad the entire country's in tears.
It's also that.
It is also that, but it's a response to COVID-19 and the different kind of levels of alert that we're on and shutting various things down to
so different counties in the country will be in different tiers, 2, 3, or 4, and each tier requires certain things to be closed or stopped based on the rates of infection in that area. However, for Christmas and New Year, they said everybody's at the highest tier, everything's shut for 3 weeks because the rate of infection is through the roof. Churches obviously are part of that. Prior to that, we were able to meet with up to 50 people, socially distanced in our spaces. We just weren't allowed to sing or physically share communion. But anyway, this email came in and I just thought, it's this, I'm trying to be careful. I'm also not. Just this childish thing of, we have the right to have our Sunday service and you can't stop us. Yeah. And very little regard for the consequences of that. So I sent back an email in which I did not mince my words.
I thought you were very polite. You shared some of the stuff you said, and I was like, that seems actually very polite while also being very firm.
I was as polite as I felt like I could be.
Yeah. And it's worth saying that this wasn't anything from the Ministers' Fellowship. They were just passing things on in good conscience and good faith and all that kind of stuff. This is just a group of people who, we probably won't name, but they'll be familiar to you for raising legal challenges about and crying persecution when...
That's my biggest thing. My biggest thing is this victim mentality of Christians being under attack for things. And occasionally there has been unfair treatment of the church. I really objected when things opened up over the summer and basically pubs could be at full capacity, people drinking, no masks, all that kind of stuff. It was a riot and churches were still limited, could barely do anything. And, we tried to push our union to say to the government, look at these two things. Pubs can be full, but you can only have 20 people at a funeral to say goodbye to a loved one. Yeah. Like, come on, that's really unfair. And actually, our situation in the church is safer because we're all sitting 3 seats apart. not talking to each other. We have the masks on the whole service. We are safer doing that than these folk in the pub who are sitting next to each other on the bar stools and too drunk to really, keep their distance. So, and I still don't know that is even an attack on our religious liberty. I almost feel like different departments are making those decisions and not putting those two pictures side by side and saying, oh, there's some disparity here.
And the issue isn't, oh, well, then churches should be allowed to be open as well. It's kind of like, can we take the whole public health picture and say, what is actually safe? Because if it isn't safe for people to be in church, then it sure as hell isn't safe to be in pubs without masks. And like you say, inhibitions drop.
The response I got in the email from the organization had that kind of thing where it said, we're lobbying on behalf of Scotland because churches in England and Wales are allowed to be open for different things. And I was like, but should they be? It's kind of like, we should get to because they get to. And I was like, well, they get to, but should they?
Yeah. And also read the room, buddy. Saying to a Scottish person, don't you want to be more like England? Like, that's weird.
This is not the time, friend. Not the time. So I'll read you my response just to give some context. So I basically emailed back and I said, dear people, I will not be putting my name to this one. I said the government have to put the health and safety of their citizens above all else, including public worship. A deadly virus has no borders. I don't consider this a deliberate attack on our religious liberty, and I would be the first to defend us if that were the case. I agree that just like the closing of restaurants and other businesses, legally there are some issues to closing church buildings without warning, as the government have done. And here's the thing. This is why it set me off on one. I said, theologically, I can't say that churches are closed. Certainly ours never has been. We've continued to worship, to pray, and to serve the community without the use of our building. And I think that telling the governments that we are useless without our buildings will do the reputation of the church a real disservice and potentially say something about us we're not actually intending to say. I basically said, in this case, I would rather uphold the reputation of the church by showing that even without our buildings in the short term, we remain a covenant people who can worship and pray and serve because our buildings don't define us, and hold good faith the government will enable us to gather in our buildings when it's safe to do so. Absolutely. And I would add on to that, if then the opening deal isn't very fair, well, then we go after them. That's
sure.
Fine.
Absolutely. But also for me, the main thing with the church's reputation in a situation like this is, how does it make us look?
Yeah.
If our reputation in society to people outside the churches, those guys care more about their Sunday club than they do about public health. They are absolutely okay to spread disease because they think they're going to heaven, and so they don't care how many other people die. Like, the damage to our witness by that kind of attitude is just staggering.
That's what got me. It's, what does this say about the church? When we cry victim, and sometimes it's justified, sometimes the rules kind of are bent against us, and I understand that. But in this case, for us to say, we are so frustrated because we don't get to do the thing that we want to be doing in the face of everybody else not being able to do the thing that they're doing, it doesn't bode well. And even though we have the understanding that we are called to worship together, we are called to be a people who meet together, I understand that. I think Jesus understands that. I don't think we're going to get back to church in 6 months and Jesus is going to go, well, where have you been? Jesus isn't going to be, well, I was here on Sunday. Where were the rest of you? I think
standing around looking at his watch.
I think Jesus kind of gets it that on this occasion, the passing of the bread is somewhat deadly to our neighbours and maybe not the best option. But it's the church's reputation, first and foremost, that upsets me because, I've said to our church time and again, this is when we show our community that we're not a Sunday club. And this is when we show our community that we are still a living, breathing covenant people with or without the building. Mm-hmm. And actually, our witness and what we do in this time will say far more to them than possibly ever before. And so when I've worked so hard to kind of push that view of things, it's so incredibly frustrating to have people who then go, well, we want our Sunday club. And I know they don't view church as that, but that is how it sounds to the rest of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And the horror if they win And so now you have these groups of churches meeting. I just really hope, I've been really encouraged by seeing like Church of England churches saying on Twitter as well, actually, Justin Welby, please close the churches because we don't want to be the reason why more people die. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can't avoid doing in terms of going out and being in the physical proximity of people who might be infected by us or might infect us and spread this disease and put more strain on the NHS and make the passing of people who do get it even more miserable because their families can't be there and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's so much that's unavoidable. To then add to that an unnecessary risk and in the name of Jesus, as if this was somehow righteous. I don't understand it. You looked into the historical context of it as well?
Yeah, so I emailed said organisation, and the response I got back, which didn't impress me in the slightest, I'll be honest. I mean, I really kind of said to them, we have a bigger picture. We have to portray the kingdom of God as being bigger than our buildings. And as a pastor, absolutely, Sunday mornings matter to me, but we have to show the country that the kingdom of God is bigger than our Sunday services and all that kind of stuff. You know, let's have a bit more imagination about what the church is and what it means to be part of the kingdom of God. The response I got basically said, I think we're going to disagree on this. And I was like, yeah. He said, I know that there are many churches that are keen to obey the command to continue to meet together and offer in-person prayer with the laying on of hands and baptisms and the Lord's Supper with gathered worship. We are keen to support those churches that wish to uphold the right of Christians to continue to gather as they have done in much worse plagues in history before.
It's just so dumb. It's also like you're like, we were talking about this earlier, and you're like, yeah, because if you're a Christian in North Korea, you're going to be like, so what? We don't count as the church, because we can't meet together, like
exactly. So I have heard stories of the church staying back in evacuated towns when it's been the Black Plague to nurse the dying and all that kind of stuff, and I get that. So I messaged my friend Steve Holmes, who is, I think he's the head of the divinity department at St. Andrews University.
He's a theology big dog.
He is. We're Twitter buds, and I embarrass myself on a regular basis tweeting him. So I basically messaged him and said, I do want to have some kind of comparison, an accurate historical perspective on this so that I can do a theological and contextual comparison, because when we look to history, it's not always because we want to repeat it. I mean, Old Testament much. So I basically emailed him and I said, well, what is the deal with the times the churches have been around in the plagues and all that kind of stuff? So he emailed me back and he says, those stories are well known, and basically, as you describe, priests probably became unwitting vectors of transmission by going from house to house, demonstrating what I think is the key point of difference. Prior to 1850, nobody really knew how diseases were spread, and so no one appreciated the danger that a church service would be. So Luther wrote a booklet on living through the plague and tells his readers both to do nothing that might endanger their neighbour and to be frequent at worship, so they would be prepared for death should it come. He just didn't realise those two pieces of advice were contradictory. He thought the plague was spread by dirt and that cleaning would be enough to protect people. And he kind of goes on to talk about evidence of the churches closing in Switzerland, Australia, during the 1918 flu pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And the conversations around churches in Chicago basically saying, can we deliver homemade worship packs to people's houses? And can we pray with people on this newfangled thing called the phone because it might be safer?
Fantastic. I mean, the first thing that makes me think is, Steve Holmes, brain the size of a planet, what a ledge. So I think we need to acknowledge that. Also, it makes me think of the argument that gets put out there around this as well, which is a lot of people talking about, the lockdown, we just shouldn't have it. And it really comes from people who don't quite think it's caused by dirt, but might think it's caused by 5G towers or by some kind of Chinese conspiracy or some kind of weirdness like that. But
just drink some bleach. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
You're going to jail, Amy.
I am going to jail. Nobody drink bleach.
Anyway, But I think, the argument that they have is, well, yeah, but, some people's home life is really tough, which I understand, or some people are really lonely, which I understand. But as the church, our response can't be, oh, well, then I guess we'll just carry on letting people die, because we don't want, Doris to be lonely. Like, those are not our only two options.
Yeah. Especially not in this day and age. We are in the best position ever to have a pandemic, which doesn't make it easier for us really, because what would we do? But, through the wars, people lived in the blackouts and they had to sit home with the candles and, no TV and all that kind of stuff. And we have to sit home with Netflix and Alexa, and it's so, so hard. It's very frustrating. Yeah. And I think it's this thing about the responsibility for your neighbor. And I am getting more and more frustrated with my faith, my choice, my liberty attitude, which actually is wildly unbiblical. We certainly, in a political sphere, we want to protect our rights for public worship and all that kind of stuff. That is good and true. But when you read, the Old Testament and the Levitical laws and all that kind of stuff, the Torah teaches that we should love, it says to love your neighbor. But actually, the more accurate translation of that is we should love for our neighbor, which means we should love for our neighbor what we love for ourselves, which means awarding our neighbor the security, value, identity, dignity, and freedom that we love for ourselves. And we should live and behave and choose in a way that moves towards the realization of those things for them, because there is a deep moral and covenantal imperative that we take responsibility for the life of our neighbor, which means limiting the power that we have to oppress them and investing the freedom we have to serve them. And so when you look at covenant life in Sinai, there almost was no such thing as individualism. Your rights were entirely within the framework of your community, and everything you did had an impact on other people. And that's how you had to judge your actions. And I just think Jesus didn't throw that stuff away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough stuff for me to hear, because I was raised in a very individualist kind of philosophy and mindset, and I have a lot of time for kind of Enlightenment individualist thinking, but it has to always be held in balance with, and I think must be trumped by the good of the larger community. And that doesn't mean forcing people into uniformity or conformity. It doesn't mean the oppression of the individual at the whim of the majority. Like, I believe minorities should be protected. I believe that individual rights should be protected. But as a desire to love my neighbor,
Yeah. And politically, it's almost hard. You have to separate, but you can't separate, the political side of, yes, we all do have individual rights and freedoms that we should have. But as a Christian, when we live in covenant with others, that covenant comes with responsibility. And the whole point of the Good Samaritan, Jesus is saying, actually, that covenant, who is your neighbor? That covenant is the person in need, because whoever is in need is the person you have responsibility for. Covenantal responsibility is beyond your group of people. It's whoever's in need. And it's such a wild story when you get into it.
Yeah.
I think Levitical law, it gets a really hard time. It's hard to interpret and hard to understand. I have such an appreciation for a lot of it at the moment. I've been reading books by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away recently, and his stuff is just fascinating. But reading his books on Leviticus, and I was like, it's amazing how, because that's where you find this whole an eye for an eye thing. That was a law. It's an eye for an eye, and the damage done by you should basically receive in equal measure. And you kind of read that and you go, how is that godly, and how is that biblical, and what on earth? But actually, you have to look at those things in comparison to their original context. And in their original context, the rich and the elite and the powerful could take the lives of the vulnerable and the poor without consequence, completely without consequence, because their lives did not matter. All lives did not matter in that context. And this Levitical law said every life does matter. And so you cannot just willingly take the life of another without full consequence. And when you look at it like that, you're like, that sounds remarkably like the agenda that some of us are trying to work for here and now. When you put it in black and white next to today's stuff, you're like, holy moly, an eye for an eye makes no sense. But actually, that is God saying every life is as valuable as the other. So you don't get to go around just killing people or letting people die because their life is somehow less valuable. And actually, in that context, that stuff is radical. And I just think we have lost that heart of God in the name of individual liberty.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I've gone off on one again.
No, that's amazing. And, actual Bible teaching on Bare Christianity.
Go read Leviticus, people. Genuinely, Conversation and Covenant, the Conversation and Covenant book series is wild. I love it.
Right. As our pod pastor, for anybody out there who is in a church leadership position or is going to be going to a church meeting or, is on the church council or whatever, a lot of churches are having these conversations. What advice do you give or could you give to people? And I know you never claim to be an expert or any of that sort of stuff. But as a pastor, what would you say to those who are like, yeah, but I'm worried about the people who can't participate on Zoom or on the YouTube thing or whatever? What would you say to them?
Yeah, it is really hard. I mean, our church, I would say there's maybe about a quarter of them who really aren't online at all, who don't have kind of technological means, who it took the best part of 8-9 months to get them to sign up for Facebook just to watch the services. And we've kind of been like, what do we do with them? Because we don't want them to be left behind and we don't want them to be struggling on their own. It's working out what they need. And within the limits that we have, how much can we do for them? So we have a phone system that everybody in the church is phoned by somebody on a weekly basis. So every deacon, every elder has deacons that they have to phone. Every deacon has church members that they phone. And so we have a good phone communication system. We have newsletters. And we recently did a kind of parcel drop by where we got our most digitally isolated people. We got them all a gift on behalf of the church and dropped it off at their doorstep with a plant and some biscuits and coffee and just anything we can do to let them know they're not forgotten, to let them know they're still loved and valued by the church, even if they're not able to participate online. I think that's the key. I think for a lot of people, they understand that they can't participate. They just don't want to be forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. Love your neighbor again, eh?
Yeah, getting good at that.
Amie, thank you so much for being on Bare Christianity. I really, really appreciate it. And
you are very welcome.
I hope that this year is very kind to you. I also hope that we get to speak to you soon. You've got some cool stuff that I want to talk to you about coming up about like mental health and all that sort of stuff with the church. So hopefully we'll get you back on the podcast soon.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Bare Christianity. You can find all of our episodes at barechristianity.libsyn.com, libsyn.com. But really, if you just search in Spotify or Apple or Stitcher or even on YouTube, you can find all of our episodes. And you can find us on Twitter, Bare Christianity. You can find us on Instagram, Bare Christianity. We're even on Facebook, although one of my co-hosts didn't know we were on Facebook. So,
amazing.
If you want to leave us a voice note that we can then answer your questions or your comments, whatever, you can find us at barechristianity.speakpipe.com, I think. Or wait, I'll actually find that.
Leave them a message.
Leave them a message like somebody else said. Sorry, it's speakpipe.com/barechristianity.
Leave a message and tell them about your dog.
Do not tell me about your freaking dog.
Do you guys know I have a dog?
Oh, wow. Here we go. Also, there's a Bare Christianity, the newsletter, which isn't really particularly linked to the podcast, but it's some opinion that I write and...
you have opinions?
Me, of all people.
I know.
You can get that at barechristianity.substack.com. So we have SpeakPipe and Substack, and you can sign up to get those emails for free. Though one day I'm going to start charging people for it, but it won't be any of the people who signed up for free. So you should get in on the ground floor. That's what I'm saying. It's like a pyramid scheme or something. I don't know.
All right, Gareth.
Also, have you tried my essential oils? Okay, thanks for listening to Bare Christianity. Thank you, Amie. Amie, what is your Twitter handle? Because I feel like people are missing out if they're not following you.
Oh, no. I'm afraid to give it now. It is just at Amie Aitken. Amie is A-M-I-E. Aitken's A-I-T-K-E-N. Please send me a picture of your dog and don't be mean.
That is the rule. Okay. Thanks a lot, Amie, and have a lovely 2021. I don't know.
You
it's weird.
too. Bye.
Bye.